Clara Bennett pressed both hands flat against the wagon boards to keep them from shaking. The man standing at the gate of that remote Montana ranch was bigger than she expected. Quieter. His eyes moved past her straight to the two small girls climbing down behind her. Emma gripped the suitcase handle with both fists. Lily clutched a torn cloth doll against her chest and said nothing. Clara stepped forward before Caleb could speak. "I know what the letter said," she told him. "I know I lied, but please, before you make us leave, just look at them. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single episode. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now stay with me, because what happens next inside that Montana ranch will change the way you think about family courage and what it truly means to open your door." The letter had taken 6 weeks to reach Caleb Whitmore. He had read it twice at the kitchen table, once in the morning light and once by lantern that same evening, and both times he had felt the same low, uncomfortable pull in his chest. Not excitement, not hope, but something closer to necessity. A man needed a partner to run a ranch of this size through a Montana winter. He was not romantic enough to pretend otherwise. He had tried romance once a long time ago, and the land had taken everything that mattered from him before he could hold on to it. So he wrote back to the agency. Practical. Direct. He described the ranch, the work, the altitude, the cold. He made no promises about a soft life. He wrote, "I am not an easy man to live with. I am not looking for companionship so much as a capable partner. If that is enough, I am willing." And the agency had written back with a name. Clara Bennett. 26. Strong constitution. Willing to work. No encumbrances. That last word had mattered to Caleb. He had underlined it with his thumb and then set the letter in the tin box where he kept the few documents that defined his life. No encumbrances. One woman. A clear arrangement. He could manage that. What he could not manage, what he had never once considered in the 6 weeks of slow waiting that followed, was the sight of two small children stepping down off that wagon behind her. He had walked out to the front gate, the way he always approached anything uncertain. Slowly, with his hands loose at his sides and his face carefully neutral. The wagon driver had pulled to a stop in a cloud of dry summer dust, and Caleb had stood there with the sun behind him and waited. He heard the boards creak. He saw a woman's boot find the wheel spoke, then the ground. She straightened up and turned, and he had a single moment to register that she was younger than he had imagined, with chestnut hair pinned back from a face that was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the journey. Then she stepped aside, and there they were. The older girl climbed down with the careful movements of a child who had learned not to ask for help. She was thin, serious-faced with the same dark hair as the woman, and she was gripping the handle of an old leather suitcase with both hands like she intended to carry it herself or die trying. The younger one was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and she had her face turned into the back of the older girl's dress, peeking out just enough to see him with one wide brown eye. She was holding something against her chest, a cloth doll he realized so worn and mended it was barely recognizable as a doll at all. Caleb stood at the gate and said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at the woman. "The letter said no encumbrances," he said. Clara Bennett met his eyes. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She had clearly been preparing for this moment for 6 weeks, probably longer, and she was going to face it standing straight, regardless of what it cost her. "It did," she said. "I told the agency that because I knew they wouldn't place me otherwise. I am sorry for the deception. Truly. But these girls..." Her voice caught just barely, just enough that he heard it. She pressed past it. "These are my sisters. Emma is 10. Lily is 6. Our parents died of fever 14 months ago, and if I leave them behind, there is a man back east who will take them, and he will not be kind to them." Caleb looked at the older girl, Emma. She had stopped pretending to be busy with the suitcase and was watching him with dark, direct eyes that were too old for her face. She reminded him of himself at that age, which was not a comfortable thing to recognize. He looked at the little one, Lily. She had pulled her face fully out from behind her sister's dress now and was watching him with an expression of raw terror that she was trying very hard to conceal behind stillness. He looked back at Clara. "The agency made a contract," he said. One woman. I know that. You lied to them. I did. You lied to me. She held his gaze. Yes. Why should I let you stay? Clara Bennett took one slow breath. Then she said very quietly, I'm not asking you to let me stay. I understand what I did, and I understand what it means. But those two girls behind me have been sleeping in boarding houses and sharing half portions of food for over a year because I couldn't find another way to keep us together. Emma hasn't said more than 10 words a day since we buried our mother. Lily wakes up crying and won't say why. They have been through things no child should have to understand. She paused. I am not asking you for charity. I am asking you to let us work. All three of us. Whatever you need on this ranch, we will do it. I will do anything that is reasonable, and a great deal that isn't, if it means those girls get to sleep in the same house 2 nights running. Caleb looked at her for a long time. The wagon driver was watching with open curiosity. The summer heat pressed down on everything. A horse somewhere behind the fence shifted its weight and blew out a breath, and the sound was the only thing that moved in the silence. The agency will want an explanation, Caleb said finally. I know. There are people in town who will have opinions about this. I expect so. It will be talked about. Probably. He studied her face. She was not asking him to pretend the situation was simple. She was not offering him a softened version of the truth. She had lied to get here, and she was standing in front of that lie now without trying to dress it up in anything prettier than what it was. There was something in that he found he could not dismiss. He looked one more time at the two girls. Emma had set the suitcase down on the ground and was holding Lily's hand. The little one leaned against her sister's arm and watched Caleb with that same stillness, that terrible, careful stillness. Like she had already learned that making herself small and quiet was the safest way to survive. Caleb Whitmore had spent 4 years telling himself he preferred silence, standing there in that gate with the summer dust still settling. He understood for the first time what kind of silence he had actually been living in. He stepped back. Come inside, he said. At least eat before anyone decides anything. He turned and walked toward the cabin without waiting to see if they followed, because if he turned around and looked at them again, he thought something might shift in him that he would not be able to put back in its place. Behind him, he heard the soft crunch of 3 pairs of feet on dry ground. His name was Caleb James Whitmore, and he was 34 years old, and he had built everything on this ranch with his own hands. He had come to Montana at 22 with a young wife named Ruth, and enough stubbornness to make something out of hard land. For 3 years they had worked side by side, and he had been happy in the way that men are happy when they are too busy to examine it closely. Then the winter of 1871 had come down off the mountains like something biblical, and Ruth had gotten sick in November, and by February she was gone, and their infant son with her and Caleb had spent the following spring doing the only thing he knew how to do, which was working the land, because the land did not require anything from him except labor. He had not written to any agency. He had not advertised for a wife. He had not reached out to anyone in the valley for help or company. He had worked, and he had been quiet, and the years had accumulated around him the way snow accumulates. It's not all at once, but one layer at a time, until the weight of it became something he stopped noticing. He had written to the agency because his foreman, old Pete Harlan, had broken his hip in the spring and would not be walking without a cane for the rest of his life. And Caleb had looked at the size of what needed doing and done the arithmetic and understood that he needed help. That was all it was. Arithmetic. Or that was what he told himself. He put beans on and cut bread, and did not say much, while Clara and the girls settled onto the bench along the cabin wall. Emma sat straight, hands folded, watching everything with those careful dark eyes. Lily pressed against her sister's side and held the cloth doll against her chest, and watched Caleb specifically tracking his movements around the kitchen, the way a small animal tracks something large and unpredictable. He set bowls on the table. Sit, he said. Clara moved to the table. Emma pulled Lily with her. They sat. Caleb sat across from them. For a while no one said anything. Lily looked at the bowl of beans. Then she looked up at Caleb. Then she looked back at the bowl. Go ahead, he said. She ate. The sound of the spoon against the clay bowl was, Caleb thought, the loudest thing he had heard in a long time. Clara ate carefully and efficiently, the way someone eats who has learned not to waste anything. Emma ate without lifting her eyes. Lily ate with the focused intensity of a child who was trying very hard not to eat too fast, and he could see from the effort it was costing her that fast was exactly what she wanted to do. "When did you last have a full meal?" he asked. Clara looked up. 2 days ago, we had cheese and cornbread at the last stop. Before that, a pause. 4 days, we managed crackers and dried apple. Caleb pushed the bread toward them. "Eat all of it." Clara looked at him. He looked back. She reached for the bread. Lily ate 2 full bowls. Emma ate 1.5 and then sat back with a dignity that would have been impressive in a 40-year-old woman. Clara ate steadily and did not watch him the way the girls did, and he respected her for it. She had made her gamble. She was not going to spend the evening performing gratitude in a way that felt like begging. After the bowls were empty, he said, "There are 2 rooms besides mine. The girls can share one. You take the other." Clara went very still. "You're letting us stay." "I'm letting you stay tonight." He looked at her. "Tomorrow, I'll decide the rest." She nodded once. "That's fair." "I want the truth from here on out, all of it." "Yes." "No more arrangements with agencies or contracts that don't reflect what's actually happening." "Understood." "And I need to know about this man you mentioned, the one back east." Something moved through her expression, not quite fear, but its close relative. She pulled it back quickly. "His name is Nathaniel Crow. He was a business partner of our father's. When our parents died, he came forward with documents claiming our father owed him a debt, a significant one." Her hands rested flat on the table. "The debt may be real. I don't know. The amount he claims is not. And the way he spoke about the arrangement about Emma and Lily specifically." She stopped. "I am not willing to let him near them." "What arrangement?" "He suggested the girls could work off the debt in his household." She said it evenly, without inflection, the way people say things they have rehearsed to keep from falling apart. Emma and Lily. In his household. Until the debt was satisfied. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "How old is this man?" 53. He did not say what he was thinking. He looked at Emma, who had gone very still during this exchange, and he understood from her stillness that she had heard this conversation before, perhaps many times. She knew what Nathaniel Crow's offer meant. She was 10 years old, and she already knew. "All right," Caleb said. "Get some sleep. We'll talk more tomorrow." He did not sleep much that night. He lay on his back in the dark and listened to the sounds the house was making, sounds it had never made before. The creak of the bed in the room where the girls slept. A soft voice. Clara's low and steady saying something he couldn't make out, but that had the rhythm of comfort. Then quiet. Then around midnight, the sound of small feet crossing the floor and a door opening, and then the low murmur of Clara talking again, and then silence again, and then nothing. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. In the morning, he was up before dawn the way he always was, and he was standing at the stove with coffee heating when he heard movement in the other room. Emma appeared in the doorway first. She was dressed, hair neatly pinned back, and she stood at the threshold and looked at him with those dark, direct eyes. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," he said. "What needs doing?" He looked at her. "I beg your pardon. On the ranch," she said. "What needs doing? First thing Clara says we pull our weight wherever we are, so I'm asking what needs doing." Caleb studied her for a moment. "You ever work a ranch before?" "No, but I learn fast." He poured a second cup of coffee and set it on the table for Clara, he supposed, when she appeared. "Fence line to the east needs checking. After that, the water trough in the north pasture has a slow leak." Emma nodded, like he had given her a list of tasks she intended to memorize. "I can carry tools," she said. "I'm stronger than I look." "I believe you," he said. Clara appeared a few minutes later with Lily close behind her, the cloth doll tucked under one arm. Clara looked at the coffee on the table, then at Caleb, and something complicated moved through her expression before she settled it back into neutrality. "Thank you," she said. "Fence line east needs checking," he said. "Your sister already volunteered." Clara looked at Emma. Emma looked at the floor for just a moment, the first crack in her composure he had seen, and then looked back up. Clara looked at Caleb. She did not say anything, but he saw what passed across her face, and he looked away from it because it was too much to absorb before the coffee was finished. They fell into a rhythm faster than he expected. Emma was, as she had promised, a fast learner. She followed him on fence checks without complaint and without chattering, which he appreciated. And she carried tools without being asked and held boards while he hammered without needing instruction. She was not naturally strong, but she was precise, and she paid attention. And in his experience, precision and attention took a person further than strength alone. Clara worked the household and the garden with a focused efficiency that quietly astonished him. He had kept the garden barely alive for 4 years, enough to get by, no more. Within 2 weeks, she had it producing in a way it hadn't since Ruth was alive. She reorganized the root cellar. She found the inventory system he had abandoned 2 years ago and rebuilt it better. She mended gear he had been meaning to fix for months and never touched. She was not performing helpfulness. She was not trying to prove she deserved to stay. She simply worked the way he worked because the work was there and it needed doing. Lily was a different matter. Lily did not work because she was 6 years old, and there was not much on a ranch that a 6-year-old could contribute to without creating more problems than she solved. She followed Clara in the mornings and Emma in the afternoons, and she did not say much to Caleb directly. But she watched him, constantly. She watched him the way a child watches something she is trying to understand, calculating and careful. The breakthrough came at the end of the 2nd week. Caleb was in the north pasture with the horse he had owned, the longest a gray with a white blaze that his foreman Pete had named Thunder years ago as a joke, because the animal was constitutionally incapable of hurry and startled at nearly nothing. Thunder was old and slow, and Caleb kept him mostly out of sentiment, which was not something he would have admitted to anyone. He heard small feet behind him. He did not turn around. Thunder's ears swiveled. Lily appeared at his elbow. She was holding the cloth doll in both hands. She looked up at the horse with her bottom lip slightly caught between her teeth, the way children look at something they want very badly but are afraid of. "He's old," Caleb said. Not unkindly, just as a fact. "Does it hurt him?" she asked. "Being old?" "Don't think so. He's slow, but he's comfortable." Lily considered this. Then she held the cloth doll up toward the horse, as if offering an introduction. Thunder dropped his enormous gray head and breathed against the doll, then against Lily's hands, and Lily went perfectly still with a look on her face that Caleb had no word for and did not try to find one. "Can I come back?" she asked. "Pasture's always open," he said. She came back the next day, and the day after. After 2 weeks, she could brush Thunder's flank without having to stand on a bucket. After 3, she was talking to the horse in a low, continuous murmur while she worked, telling him things, stories, fragments of memory questions she didn't seem to need answered. Caleb heard pieces of it sometimes when he passed, and he did not stop to listen, but he heard enough. He heard the name of her mother. He heard something about a yellow dress. He heard her tell the horse that she missed the sound of rain on a real roof. He walked past and left her to it. In town, things were less quiet. Caleb went in for supplies at the end of the 3rd week, and he could feel the shift before he was halfway down the main street. People had heard. Gossip moved through a small frontier town faster than weather, and by now everyone from the feed store to the general store knew that Caleb Whitmore had accepted a mail-order bride who had arrived with 2 children she hadn't disclosed. The opinions were predictable. Ed Harmon at the feed store said it carefully, with the particular tone of a man who believes he is offering sage counsel. "Whitmore, word is the woman you sent for brought trouble with her. Young ones too. Agency don't usually honor that kind of arrangement." "The agency's business is with the agency," Caleb said. "Load the oats." "Just saying there are those who think you're being taken advantage of. Woman shows up with 2 mouths that weren't in the contract." "Ed," Caleb said, "load the oats." Harmon loaded the oats. At the dry goods store, Mrs. Calder was less oblique. "I heard she lied about those children," she said, making no pretense about why she was raising the subject. "Deceived both you and the agency. I'm not sure a man ought to reward that kind of behavior. Sends the wrong message, especially to women who think they can work around the terms of a contract." Caleb set his list on the counter. "I need the items on that list, Mrs. Calder. I'm only saying." "I know what you're saying." He looked at her. "Those children's parents died 14 months ago. The older one is 10 years old, and she's already learned to hold the wrong end of a fence board while a man hammers because she wants to earn her place. The little one lost her mother and doesn't sleep without waking. You tell me where in that picture there's a wrong message." Mrs. Calder was silent for a moment. Just fill the list," he said. She filled the list. He drove home with the wagon loaded and the summer light long and gold across the high grass, and he thought about what Ed Harmon had said. "Taken advantage of." He turned the phrase over in his mind the way you turn a stone to see what's underneath it. He thought about Emma holding that fence board at 7 in the morning without being asked. He thought about Clara reorganizing the root cellar on her third day because she had noticed the system didn't work and she could see a better one. He thought about Lily telling a gray horse about the sound of rain. Taken advantage of was not the phrase he would have chosen. 2 days later, the stranger arrived. Caleb was at the fence line to the east when he saw the man ride up to the cabin. Not a local horse, not a local saddle, not a local manner of sitting in it. He was well dressed for the territory, which meant he was from somewhere that wasn't the territory. He had a narrow face and hands that had not done recent physical labor, and he rode to the front of the cabin and waited without dismounting, which was the kind of thing men did when they wanted to make clear they did not intend to stay long. Caleb walked back from the fence line without hurrying. He could see Clara had come to the doorway. She stood there with the flour still on her hands from bread, and she was very still in the way that she was still when something cost her effort. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of control. Caleb came through the gate and stopped. "Help you," he said. The man looked down at him from the horse. He had the practiced ease of someone accustomed to looking down at people. "Are you Caleb Whitmore?" "I am. I represent Nathaniel Crow of Philadelphia. Mr. Crow has a legal claim against the estate of one Thomas Bennett, deceased. It has come to Mr. Crow's attention that Clara Bennett, daughter of the said Thomas Bennett, is currently residing on your property." He reached inside his coat and produced a folded document. "These are the terms of the outstanding debt. Mr. Crow is prepared to be reasonable about resolution provided Miss Bennett cooperates and returns east with me." Caleb did not take the document. "Reasonable," he said. "That's right. What does reasonable look like in Mr. Crow's estimation?" The man's eyes moved briefly to the doorway where Clara had not moved. "That's a matter between Mr. Crow and Miss Bennett." "Miss Bennett is on my property," Caleb said. "Anything that concerns her here concerns me. Mr. Whitmore." The man's voice shifted just slightly, not quite threatening, but preparing to be. "This is a legal matter, a debt owed. Mr. Crow has the documentation to support his claim, and the law will support his right to resolution. I'd strongly advise you not to complicate something that doesn't involve you." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "Get off my land," he said. The man blinked. "I beg your pardon. You rode onto my property without an invitation, and you handed me a piece of paper I didn't ask for, and now you're advising me not to complicate things." Caleb took one step forward. "I'm not complicating anything. I'm telling you that you're on private land. You don't have permission to be here, and if you want to conduct legal business, you can do it through proper channels, in a proper town, in front of a proper judge. Now get off my land." The man held his gaze for a moment, calculating. Then he pulled the reins, turned the horse, and rode back down the track without another word. Caleb waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then he turned toward the cabin. Clara was still standing in the doorway. The flour was still on her hands. Behind her, he could see Emma very still just inside the threshold, and Lily pressed against Emma's side with her face turned down. Caleb walked up to the door. "All right," he said quietly. "Tell me everything, about Crow, about the debt, About whatever it is you've been carrying since before you got on that wagon." Clara looked at him. Her expression was something he could not entirely read. Not relief, not yet, but something adjacent to it. The beginning of something she had not let herself feel in a long time. "Come inside," she said. "It will take a while." "I've got time," he said. He stepped through the door. Emma moved out of his way and then moved back into the space he had crossed, looking up at him with those dark eyes. "He won't come back?" she asked. Caleb looked down at her. "Not today," he said. "And if he does, he'll have to go through me to get here." Emma held his gaze for a moment. Then she gave the smallest nod, not a child's reassurance, seeking, but something more like acknowledgement. Like a soldier nodding to another soldier after a first engagement. He nodded back. Then he sat down at his own kitchen table in his own house that was already beginning to feel different from what it had been 3 weeks ago, and he listened. Clara told him everything. She told him about her father, Thomas Bennett, a merchant who had gone into business partnership with Nathaniel Crowe a decade ago, and who had spent the last 3 years of his life trying to extricate himself from an arrangement that had curdled into something he hadn't anticipated. She told him about her mother's illness, which had come first, and then her father's, which had come 6 months later, and the 2 overlapping months of watching both parents fail at once. She told him about the morning she had gone to the bank and found that Crowe had already been there, already spoken to the manager, already positioned himself as the primary creditor on an estate that her father had not managed to properly document before he became too ill to manage anything. "The debt is real," she said. "At least part of it. My father borrowed money. He borrowed more than he should have, and he knew it, and he was ashamed of it. But the amount Crowe is claiming, it's 3 times what the original arrangement showed. He's added interest and penalties that were never agreed upon. I've seen the original papers." She looked at her hands. "I still have them." Caleb went very still. "You have documentation?" "Yes." "You've had it this whole time?" She looked up at him. "I was afraid if I presented it, he would find another way. A legal challenge takes time and money and connections, and Crowe has all 3. I thought if I could just get Emma and Lily somewhere safe." "So you ran," he said, not accusatory, just naming it. "I ran," she agreed. "I know that wasn't—" "It was what you had available," he said. He looked at her steadily. "Where are those papers now?" A pause. Then she stood up, went to the room where the girl slept, and came back a moment later with the cloth doll. She set it on the table. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Lily doesn't know," she said quietly. "I sewed them inside before we left. Lily carries it because it was our mother's doll. She doesn't know what's in it." Caleb looked at the worn cloth doll on the kitchen table, at the careful, barely visible stitches along one side. He thought about that little girl telling a gray horse about the sound of rain holding this doll against her chest for 14 months, and he thought about what Clara had done, the only hiding place she could think of, the one thing no agent of Nathaniel Crowe would think to search, because who searched a child's rag doll? He looked up at Clara. "Tomorrow," he said. "I'm going to town. I'm going to talk to the county land agent, and I'm going to find out who the right attorney is for something like this. And then we're going to make a plan." Clara was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to do this." "I know. It'll cost you time, money. Crowe has influence. He'll use it." "I expect so." "Caleb." She said his name for the first time. Just his name, nothing attached to it, and the sound of it in this kitchen felt different from anything that had happened in this kitchen in 4 years. "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because your sister carries her mother's doll with legal documents sewn inside it, and she doesn't know. Because your other sister holds fence boards at 7 in the morning so she can earn her place. Because you lied to get here, and you're still telling me the truth." He paused. "And because a man named Nathaniel Crowe rode a representative onto my land and told me not to complicate things that weren't my business." He stood up. "I don't like being told what's my business," he said. He picked up his coffee cup and walked toward the window, and outside, the evening was settling gold and orange over the high grass, and thunder was moving slowly across the north pasture, and somewhere in this house were 3 people who had arrived unexpected and unwanted, and had somehow, in the space of 3 weeks, made the silence of this ranch feel like something different than peace. He stood there and looked out at his land that was just beginning to feel like something more than a place where he worked and slept and waited for nothing in particular. From behind him, very quietly, he heard Lily's voice asking Emma something. He heard Emma's low answer. He heard Clara moving in the kitchen, putting the doll back, organizing something, the familiar sound of competence and care that had filled his mornings for 3 weeks. He did not turn around, but he did not want to be anywhere else. That was the part he had not expected. That was the part he was still trying to understand. The next morning, Caleb rode into Harlan Creek before the stores opened. He had not slept well, but that was not new. What was new was the reason. In the past 4 years, sleeplessness had come from silence, from the weight of nothing pressing down in the dark. Last night, it had come from too much. Too many things turning over in his mind that had not been there 3 weeks ago. He tied his horse in front of the land office and waited with his hat in his hand until the clerk inside came to unlock the door, and then he asked 3 direct questions. The clerk answered 2 of them and referred him to a man named Aldous Fitch for the third. Aldous Fitch was a lawyer who operated out of a back room above the dry goods store, which was not the most confidence-inspiring arrangement Caleb had ever encountered. But the clerk had said the man was honest, and that in a frontier county was worth more than a brass nameplate. Caleb climbed the outside stairs and knocked. The man who opened the door was somewhere past 60, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck and ink on 2 fingers of his right hand. He looked at Caleb the way lawyers look at men who show up before business hours, not surprised, but attentive. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, which meant news traveled faster than Caleb had assumed. "Come in." Caleb came in. He did not sit when Fitch gestured to the chair. He stood and explained the situation in the same order. Clara had explained it to him. The debt, the original papers, the inflated claim, Crow's representative on his land. He described the documents sewn into the cloth doll, which produced a slight widening of the older man's eyes. He said the name Nathaniel Crow 3 times, watching Fitch's expression each time. On the 3rd time, Fitch took his glasses off the cord and put them on. "You know him," Caleb said. "I know of him," Fitch said. "He's brought 2 similar claims through Wyoming in the past 5 years. A deceased merchant's estate, disputed debt amounts, family members with limited means and limited legal recourse." He set the glasses back on the cord. Neither case reached court. Both families settled for amounts significantly above what could be verified. Because they didn't have documentation. "Because they didn't have documentation," Fitch agreed. He looked at Caleb. "If Miss Bennett has original papers showing the agreed terms, she does. Then the picture changes considerably." He paused. "Mr. Whitmore, I have to ask you plainly. What is your interest in this matter?" Caleb looked at him. "Those 3 women are on my ranch." "Is that the whole of it?" "That's enough of it." Fitch studied him for a moment, with the particular scrutiny of a man who has spent his career determining whether people are telling the truth. Then he nodded once, as if some conclusion had been reached. "Bring me the documents. I won't charge you for the first consultation. If there's a case to be made, we'll discuss terms then." Caleb put his hat back on. "I'll have them to you by end of week." He rode home through the morning heat and did not stop in town to speak to anyone, which meant that the 6 people who saw him ride through carried their observations to their own conversations, and by afternoon, the shape of what Caleb Whitmore was doing had become a topic in Harlan Creek that people had opinions about. He told Clara about Fitch when he got back. She listened from across the kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface the way she did when she was taking something in carefully. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He's not going to like it," she said. "Crow. If we bring those papers forward, he won't take it quietly. I know that. He has money. He has people. He'll find ways to make this difficult that we haven't thought of yet." "Probably." "Caleb." She looked at him directly. "I need you to understand what you're walking into. This isn't a straightforward debt dispute. Crow is the kind of man who uses the law the way other men use a weapon. He doesn't need to win a case in court. He just needs to drag it out long enough that it costs more than it's worth. Then we move faster than he expects, Caleb said. She studied him. You've done this kind of thing before. No, he said. But I've driven cattle through a blizzard before. The principle is similar. Something moved through her expression, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, the structure underneath before it fully arrived. She looked down at the table. All right, she said. The doll, he said. She looked up. Lily can't know what's in it, not yet. But I need you to get those papers out and have them ready before the end of the week. Clara nodded. She stood up. She went to the back room. He heard her moving quietly, heard the low voice she used with Lily, explaining something. I need to borrow Mama's doll for a little while, sweetheart. I'll give it right back. And then Lily's voice higher, uncertain. But why, Clara? What's wrong with it? And Clara's voice again, steady and careful. Nothing's wrong with it. I just need to look at something. It's all right. A pause. Then the sound of small footsteps. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, and her eyes fixed on Caleb with an expression that was something between accusation and suspicion. Is something wrong with Mama's doll? She demanded. No, Caleb said. Clara said she needed to look at something. She does. It'll be fine. Lily stared at him. You're not going to take it away. No one's taking anything away, he said. She stared at him for another 2 seconds. Then she turned around and went back, apparently satisfied or at least willing to accept the answer for now. He heard her sit down on the bed. He heard her start talking to Emma about something entirely unrelated. Clara appeared a few minutes later with a cloth envelope. Not fancy, just cotton folded carefully, and she set it on the table in front of him. He opened it and spread the papers out. They were slightly crumpled from their long hiding place but intact. He could read the figures clearly. He could see the signature. He could see the date. He gathered them back up and refolded them carefully. I'll take these to Fitch on Thursday, he said. Clara sat back down across from him. She looked at the folded cloth envelope, and then she looked at him, and her expression had shifted into something quieter and more complicated. I keep waiting for the other shoe, she said. What do you mean? For the part where this gets taken away, where you decide it isn't worth it, where something changes. She paused. People have changed their minds before. About us. He looked at her. Who? She was quiet for a moment. My father's brother offered to take Emma and Lily after the funeral. He said he had room, that he'd been fond of our parents, that it was the right thing to do. I was relieved. I thought it was going to be all right. She looked at her hands. He kept them for 6 weeks. Then his wife decided she hadn't agreed to 2 children when she agreed to 1, and he sent them back. Lily thought she had done something wrong. She didn't eat properly for a month. Caleb was quiet. My mother's cousin in Baltimore said she'd help find a placement for Emma, a good family, she said, educated, kind. She meant well, I think. But the family she found wanted 1 child, a girl of a certain age. Emma was too old, and Lily was too young. She exhaled. I spent 3 weeks in that woman's parlor drinking her tea and listening to her explain to me why it made sense to separate them. You didn't. No, she said. I didn't. She looked up at him. But I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that I am not unaware of how this looks from the outside. I know how many conditions we came with. I know what the reasonable position is for a man in your situation, looking at 3 people who arrived with a single suitcase and a debt that isn't yours. Clara, he said. She waited. I told you last night, I'm going to Fitch on Thursday. That's not a reasonable position being weighed. That's a decision already made. She held his gaze for a long moment. He could see her working out whether to believe him, not because she thought he was lying, but because she had spent 14 months learning not to let herself believe things until they were proven. It was a survival instinct. He recognized it because he had built one just like it out of different material but the same shape. All right, she said quietly. All right, he agreed. Thursday came. Fitch looked at the papers for 20 minutes without saying anything. Caleb sat across the desk and watched the old lawyer's face and waited. Emma had insisted on coming to town, which he had allowed, and she was downstairs in the dry goods store with Clara and Lily, probably making Mrs. Calder profoundly uncomfortable by simply existing in her general vicinity. "These are legitimate," Fitch said finally. "I know they're legitimate. The original debt figure is here, signed by both parties. Witnessed." He set the papers down. "The amount Crow is claiming is 240% of this figure after interest and penalties. He has no documentation to support." He looked at Caleb over his glasses. "This is not a gray area, Mr. Whitmore. If we bring this before a circuit judge, Crow doesn't have a claim. He has a fabrication." "How long to get in front of a judge?" "That depends on how aggressively Crow wants to fight it. If he's smart, he'll accept the original figure and walk away. If he's not, or if he's prideful, which men like him often are, he'll contest. That could take months." Fitch set the papers on his desk. "In the meantime, he will apply pressure through other means. I want you to be prepared for that." "What kind of pressure?" "Rumors. Legal notices designed to intimidate rather than prosecute. Possibly an attempt to establish that Miss Bennett's residence on your property is irregular and that she has no legal standing in the territory." He paused. "There may be an argument made that the children should be placed in county custody pending resolution of the estate dispute." Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. "On what basis?" "On the basis that their guardian, Miss Bennett, is in a disputed legal situation and cannot guarantee their welfare." Fitch held up a hand. "It's a weak argument. But weak arguments made by men with money and connections can do a great deal of damage before they're disproven." Caleb sat with that for a moment. "What would prevent it?" he asked. Fitch looked at him steadily. "A stable legal household." Caleb looked back at him. "I'm not suggesting anything," Fitch said carefully. "I'm outlining the legal landscape." "I understand what you're outlining," Caleb said. He rode home without stopping in town, and he was quiet all through the evening, and he did not raise the subject with Clara, because he had not fully worked out what he thought about it himself, and he had never been the kind of man who talked until he knew what he was saying. 2 days later, the rumors started. He heard the first one from Pete Harlan, his old foreman who came to the ranch on a Sunday afternoon for the first time since breaking his hip. Pete was 61 and walked with a cane now and said very little that wasn't directly useful, which was one of the reasons Caleb had kept him as long as he had. Pete sat at the kitchen table with coffee and said after the pleasantries were finished and Clara had taken the girls outside, "You should know what they're saying." "Say it then." "That the woman planned it. That she found out about the ranch before she agreed to the agency placement. That she knew you were alone up here and figured she could bring the whole family and you'd be too proud to turn them out." He looked at Caleb. "They're saying Crow's claim is legitimate and you're obstructing justice out of pride, and—" He paused. "Other motivations they're attributing to you regarding Miss Bennett's appearance." Caleb drank his coffee. "I know," Pete said. "I'm not saying I believe it. I'm saying it's what's being said." "Who's saying it?" "Harmon at the feed store, the Delaney brothers. Mrs. Calder's been quieter, which might mean she's changed her mind, or might mean she's saying it somewhere I'm not hearing." Pete set his cup down. "And there's a man in town, showed up 4 days ago. Nice clothes, doesn't say much, been buying drinks and asking questions." Caleb set his cup down too. "What kind of questions?" "About you, about the ranch, about how the agency match worked, who arranged it, whether there were other candidates." Pete looked at him. "About the girls." The tightening in his chest again. More specific this time. "What about the girls?" "Whether there's family that has a prior claim. Whether the county has been notified. Whether you have legal authority over the children." Pete met his eyes. "He's careful about it, conversational. But he's building something." Caleb looked out the window. Clara was in the yard with Lily, who appeared to be attempting to teach Thunder how to respond to a hand signal she had invented. Emma was sitting on the fence watching and offering commentary. He could not hear the words from here, but he could see Lily's focused expression and Emma's rare slight smile and Clara laughing at something Emma said. He turned back to Pete. "How long have you known me?" he asked. Pete thought about it with the literal seriousness of a man who respects precise answers. 12 years. In 12 years have you known me to be a fool? No. Have you known me to be taken advantage of? No. Have you known me to make a decision and then unmake it because people had opinions? Pete almost smiled. No. Then you know what I'm going to do about this. I know what you're going to do, Pete agreed. I came out to make sure you knew what you were walking into. He picked up his cane and pushed himself to his feet. One more thing. That man in town, he had a letter on him. I didn't see what was in it, but the postmark was Philadelphia. Caleb walked him to the door. He stood in the doorway after Pete's wagon rolled away and thought about Nathaniel Crow, sitting in Philadelphia, reading a letter about a gray horse and two girls and a woman with chestnut hair who had reorganized a root cellar and started a legal fight she didn't know she'd won yet. He thought about a cloth doll with documents sewn inside it. He thought about Lily teaching thunder hand signals. Then he went back inside and started dinner. Clara found out about the man in town the next morning. She came in from the garden with her hands still dirty and set a basket on the table and said without preamble, "Someone has been asking about the girls in town." He looked up. "Pete told me." She stared at him. "You already knew. Since yesterday evening. And you didn't?" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "I would have liked to know." "I know," he said. "I was working out what it meant before I said it. I don't like to say things until I know what I'm saying." "Caleb." She set both hands flat on the table. "If someone is asking about the legal standing of my guardianship of Emma and Lily, that is not something you work out alone and then tell me when you've decided what it means. That is something we work out together because they are my sisters and I have a right to know immediately." He looked at her. She was not afraid. She was not performing anger. She was drawing a line clear and direct, and she was right to draw it. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry." She blinked. He had the impression she had been preparing for a longer exchange. "All right," she said. She sat down. "Tell me everything Pete said," he told her. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he had come to recognize about her. She gathered the whole thing before she reacted. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He's going to try to take them," she said. "Not a question. He's going to try to use the threat of taking them to pressure you into settling." "It's the same thing." "It's not. A threat is something you can counter. An actual legal removal is something Fitch said we could prevent," she finished. She was looking at the table. Her jaw was set in a particular way. "With a stable legal household." He was quiet. She looked up at him. "He told you that?" "Yes." "And you haven't said anything?" "I told you. I work out what I'm saying before I say it." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said very carefully, "I am not going to let you make a legal arrangement out of obligation, Caleb. Whatever this is between us, whatever it's been these past weeks, I will not let it be because of Nathaniel Crow." "It wouldn't be because of Nathaniel Crow," he said. She held his gaze. "I am a man who has been alone for 4 years," he said. "I am not easy. I'm not comfortable. I don't talk enough, and I think too much, and I have spent the better part of a decade making myself into someone who doesn't need things, because needing things cost me everything once, and I was not willing to pay that price twice." He paused. "But you've been here for a month, and my foreman came out to see me for the first time since breaking his hip, and my horse has learned hand signals, and I don't fall asleep in silence anymore. And none of that has anything to do with Nathaniel Crow." Clara was very still. "I'm not asking you right now," he said. "I'm telling you where I stand. What you do with it is your business." She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer at all. Then she said, "I spent 14 months keeping those girls alive and telling myself that was enough, that taking care of them was the whole of what I had left to want." She looked down at her hands still dirty from the garden. "It has been a very long time since I let myself want something for me." He waited. "I am not saying yes," she said. "I am not saying no. I am saying—" She exhaled. "I am saying I heard you, and I need some time." "Take it," he said. She stood up and took the basket to the counter. Then she stopped with her back to him and said, "For what it's worth." The silence I had before wasn't the comfortable kind either. Then she went back to work, and so did he, and neither of them said anything else about it for the rest of the day. But something had shifted in the kitchen, in the air between them, the way the air shifts after rain, when everything smells like itself more clearly than before. The man from Philadelphia was named Gerald Potts, and Caleb met him officially 4 days later. Potts came to the ranch in the late afternoon, which was calculated. A man arrives at the end of the workday, when the person he's visiting is tired and less defended. He rode with a second man who stayed on his horse by the gate, and Potts himself came forward on foot, which was designed to look peaceable. His coat was better than the territory, his boots were clean, and his expression was the professional warmth of a man who has learned that people respond better to smiles than to the alternative. Caleb was splitting wood when he rode up. He put the axe down, but he did not put it away. "Mr. Whitmore." Potts extended a hand. "Gerald Potts. I'm an associate of Nathaniel Crow, and I'm afraid I've been sent to try to clear up an unfortunate misunderstanding." Caleb shook the hand briefly. "What misunderstanding is that?" "Well," Potts smiled, "it seems there's been some communication breakdown between Mr. Crow's office and Miss Bennet. Mr. Crow is a reasonable man. He has no desire for a prolonged legal proceeding. He simply wants to resolve an outstanding obligation and close the chapter on what has been a difficult period for everyone involved." He paused. "He has, in fact, reduced his claimed amount considerably in the interest of goodwill. I have the revised terms here." He reached into his coat. "Keep them," Caleb said. Potts stopped. "I beg your pardon. Miss Bennet's legal counsel is reviewing the original debt documentation against Mr. Crow's claim. Any revised offer can be submitted to that counsel in writing." Potts's smile became slightly more rigid. "Mr. Whitmore, legal proceedings are expensive and time-consuming. Miss Bennet is, if you'll forgive my saying, in a somewhat precarious position in terms of her standing in this territory, and a prolonged dispute would be difficult for everyone, particularly for the children." "Mr. Potts." Caleb picked up the axe and rested it across one shoulder. "You said the word children in a tone I did not care for. I'm going to ask you to say whatever you mean directly, without ornamentation." Potts studied him. "Recalibrating. Mr. Crow has certain concerns about the welfare of the minor children currently in Miss Bennet's custody. The situation here: 3 women on a remote ranch, no formal legal arrangement, it's irregular. He feels it may be his duty as a family associate to make an inquiry with the county." "He feels it may be his duty," Caleb repeated. "As a family associate." Caleb looked at him for a moment. "You tell Mr. Crow that the situation he's concerned about is being addressed. You tell him that his revised offer will be received by Mr. Aldous Fitch of Harlan Creek, who is Miss Bennet's legal representative. And you tell him that if any inquiry is made to this county about those children, he will find that this household is considerably more stable than he's counting on." Potts's eyes moved briefly past him toward the cabin. Clara was standing in the doorway. She had come out when she heard the horse, and she was standing there with her hands loose at her sides, not hiding, not afraid, watching. "Good afternoon, Mr. Potts," she said from the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at Caleb. He looked at the axe. "I'll relay your message," he said. He walked back to his horse. Caleb watched him ride out. When the sound of hooves faded, he turned. Clara had come out into the yard. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her before. Not gratitude, exactly. Not relief, exactly. But something that held both of them inside a larger feeling he didn't have a name for. "He's going to make the inquiry anyway," she said. "Probably. We have to move faster than he does." "I know." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I've decided." He was still. "Not because of Crow," she said. "Not because of any of this." She looked at him steadily. "Because of what you said in the kitchen. Because of what I said back." She paused. "And because I am tired of running, and I am tired of being afraid. And I think this might be the first place I've stood in 2 years that feels like ground." He looked at her. He thought about Ruth. He thought about the winter of 1871. He thought about 4 years of silence that had never once felt like peace. He thought about Emma holding a fence board at 7 in the morning. He thought about Lily and her hand signals. He thought about this woman standing in his doorway with flour on her hands when Crow's man rode up and not moving and not hiding and not being afraid. "Saturday," he said. "I'll speak to Reverend Cole on Thursday when I take the papers to Fitch." Clara nodded, a single deliberate nod. "One condition," she said. "Name it." Emma and Lily know before anyone else. They get to ask whatever they want to ask, and they get real answers. "Agreed," he said without hesitation. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she turned and went back inside, and he stood in the yard with the axe across his shoulder and the evening light going long across the grass. From the north pasture, he heard Lily's voice. She was talking to Thunder, the way she always did at this hour, telling the old gray horse about her day. He couldn't hear the words, but the sound of it carried across the still evening air and settled in his chest like something coming to rest after a long, long time in motion. He walked toward the barn to finish the work that was left. There was a great deal still ahead of them. Fitch and the papers and Crow's next move, and whatever Potts had meant by irregularity, and the county and the circuit judge, and the months of grinding legal geography that lay between here and resolution. He knew all of that. He was not pretending it wasn't there. But here now, in the last light of this particular day, 4 people were going to eat supper at the same table, and Emma was going to ask a question no one had expected, and Lily was going to feed Thunder an apple she had saved from lunch, and Clara was going to set 4 bowls down like it was a thing she had always done. And Caleb Whitmore, who had spent 4 years perfecting the art of wanting nothing, was going to sit down at that table. And he was going to eat. Reverend Cole was a small man with large hands, and the particular patience of someone who had spent 30 years listening to people say things they had trouble saying. He did not look surprised when Caleb walked into the church on Thursday morning. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He listened to what Caleb said, looked at him for a moment, the way Fitch had looked at him. That careful assessment of whether a man means what he's saying, and then he nodded and opened his book and said, Saturday was available. Caleb rode directly from the church to Fitch's office. Fitch took the papers, read them again with his glasses on, and said he would have a formal response to Crow's office drafted by the following Wednesday. He also said, without being asked, that he had made inquiries of his own regarding Gerald Potts, and that Potts had a history in 3 territories of preceding legal actions with what Fitch described as social pressure campaigns, a careful phrase for a uglier thing. He said Caleb should expect the rumor situation in town to worsen before it improved. "How bad?" Caleb asked. "Bad enough that you should tell Miss Bennett before she hears it from someone else," Fitch said. "There will be suggestions made about the nature of the arrangement at your ranch that are designed to undermine her reputation and by extension her legal standing as guardian." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "What kind of suggestions?" Fitch looked at him steadily. "The kind men like Crow use against women who don't have husbands." He rode home faster than he had ridden in years. He told Clara that evening after the girls were asleep. He told her plainly the way he told her everything now without softening it into something easier than it was. She sat across the table and listened, and her face went through several things. Anger first, quick and hot, and then something colder and more controlled, and then a stillness that he recognized as the place she went when she was deciding how to carry something, rather than how to put it down. "They'll say I planned it," she said. "Yes." That there's something improper about the arrangement." "Yes." She pressed her lips together. "It will affect the guardianship case." "Fitch thinks Saturday changes that," he said. "Legally." She looked at him. She was looking for something in his expression, some sign that Saturday was being offered as a solution rather than a choice. He held her gaze and let her look. "Saturday is still Saturday," he said. "Not because of this." She held his gaze one moment longer. Then she exhaled slow and deliberate and nodded. "Saturday," she said. "We should tell the girls tomorrow morning," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "Emma first, separately." He nodded. "Your call." She looked at him with something that might have been surprise just briefly at the words, Your call, like she had not fully expected to hear them from a man in this kitchen. Then it passed, and she said goodnight, and she went to check on the girls the way she did every night. And Caleb sat at the table alone for a while, and drank his coffee, and thought about Saturday, and what came after, and found that the thinking did not frighten him. That was new. Emma took it the way. Emma took everything straight on, without flinching, with those dark eyes that seemed to be cataloging information faster than most adults processed it. Clara had taken her to the porch after breakfast, while Lily was still inside with Caleb, who was showing her how to check the tension on a bridle, a task he had invented that morning specifically to occupy a 6-year-old for 15 minutes. Clara sat on the porch step with Emma and said it directly the way she always spoke to Emma, because Emma had never responded well to being managed. Caleb could not hear the conversation, but he heard the silence that followed it. A long silence. Then Emma's voice asking something. Then Clara's voice answering. Then Emma again. When they came back inside, Emma walked directly to Caleb and stood in front of him. He crouched down to her level. "Is it because of the man from Philadelphia?" she asked. "No," he said. "Is it because you feel sorry for us?" Emma. "I need to know," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. "Because Lily is going to ask me, and I need to know what to tell her." He looked at her. "Tell her that sometimes things happen in an order that makes them look like one thing when they're actually another. The man from Philadelphia and Saturday are happening at the same time. That doesn't mean one caused the other." Emma processed this with visible effort. Why then? He thought about how to answer that in a way a 10-year-old could keep. "Because your sister reorganized my root cellar on her 3rd day here," he said. "Because you held a fence board without being asked. Because your sister talks to my horse every afternoon." He paused. "Because this house sounds different than it did 6 weeks ago, and I don't want it to go back to the way it was." Emma looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "If you ever hurt her, I will make your life very difficult." He held her gaze. "I believe you." "Good," she said. And she went back to the bridle she had been examining, and she did not bring it up again. Lily was easier and harder in equal measure. She understood the word Saturday, and she understood that it meant something important, but the specific weight of it did not fully land until Clara said, "Caleb is going to be your family now, sweetheart. The same as Emma and I are your family." And then Lily sat very still for a moment, and then she said, "But he already is." And Clara made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite a cry, and pulled Lily against her, and Caleb found something urgent to attend to on the other side of the kitchen. They were married on Saturday morning with Pete Harlan and his wife as witnesses, and Reverend Cole's reading voice filling the small church with words Caleb had not heard in over a decade. Clara stood beside him in a dress Emma had pressed the night before, and her hair pinned back from her face. And when Reverend Cole asked if he took this woman, Caleb said, "I do," in the same tone he used to agree to a thing he had already decided, which was not romantic, but was entirely sincere, and which Clara, who had learned to read him, quickly understood for exactly what it was. She said "I do," looking directly at him. He looked back. Pete cried, which surprised everyone. They signed the register and rode home. And that afternoon, Caleb sent a written notice to the county office, and a formal letter through Fitch to Nathaniel Crow's Philadelphia address, and the letter said in precise legal language that Clara Bennett Whitmore was the legal spouse of a property-holding Montana rancher, that her guardianship of Emma and Lily Bennett was established and stable, and that the inflated debt claim against the Bennett estate would be contested in full, with documentation in front of the Harlan County Circuit Judge at the next available date. Fitch sent a separate letter. Caleb did not read it. He trusted Fitch to know what needed saying. Crow's response came in 11 days. It was not a letter. It was a notice of legal contest filed through a county official 2 towns over, claiming that the marriage was a calculated legal maneuver to obstruct a legitimate debt claim and requesting a judicial review of the Bennett estate documentation. Caleb read it at the kitchen table, while Clara stood behind his shoulder reading it with him. When they finished, Clara said, "He's not going away." "No," Caleb said. "He thinks the marriage looks like exactly what people in town are saying it is." Her voice was flat. A legal maneuver. Let him think it. She came around and sat across from him. Caleb, if the circuit judge accepts his framing, Fitch doesn't think he will. Fitch doesn't know Crow the way I do. Then tell me something Fitch doesn't know. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father kept a second set of records." Caleb went still. Not just the original debt agreement. He kept a ledger. Every transaction, every correspondence, every meeting. He was meticulous, my father. He didn't trust verbal agreements, and he didn't trust impressions. He wrote everything down. She looked at the table. "I didn't include the ledger with the papers I gave you because I wasn't sure it was relevant. And because—" She stopped. "Because what?" "Because the ledger shows more than the debt." She looked up at him. "It shows 3 other transactions. 3 other families. People who owed my father money and who Crow approached after my father's death with inflated claims. All 3 settled. All 3 paid more than they owed." She paused. If that ledger reaches a judge, Crow isn't just defending one contested claim. He's explaining a pattern. Caleb looked at her. "Where is the ledger?" "Philadelphia, at my father's office, or what's left of it. A man named Harris managed the office before my father died. He's still there. I wrote to him before we left, but I never received an answer, and I didn't know if—" She shook her head. "I don't know if the ledger is still there. I don't know if Harris is still there. I don't know if Crow got there first." "Write to Harris again," Caleb said. "Today. Tell him what we need and why. Tell him to hold anything he has. And if Crow has already gotten to him, then we find out and we work with what we have." He looked at her. "But you have to tell Fitch about the ledger, today, before Crow files anything else." She nodded. She went to find paper. He sat at the table and looked at Crow's legal notice and thought about a man in Philadelphia who had done this 3 times before and believed he could do it a 4th time because women without resources did not fight back, and men who helped them were not supposed to care enough to keep fighting. Caleb thought about what caring enough to keep fighting actually felt like from the inside. It felt like sitting at this table. It felt like a specific and absolute refusal to move. John. The shift in town happened faster than he expected and from a direction he had not anticipated. It started with Margaret Cole, the Reverend's wife, who had been present at the wedding and who had known Pete Harlan's wife for 20 years. Margaret Cole said something at the dry goods store the following Monday that Caleb only heard about secondhand, but the substance of it was that she had been in the presence of the Whitmore family on Saturday morning, and that what she had witnessed was not a legal maneuver, but a man making a sincere commitment, and that anyone saying otherwise was welcome to explain to her face why they thought they knew better than a woman who had been present. Mrs. Calder, to her credit, had apparently said nothing in response, which was its own kind of statement. Then Doc Ellison, who had been the nearest thing to a physician in Harlan Creek for 15 years, stopped Caleb on the street on Wednesday and said he had heard about the situation with Crow, and that he had also heard something from a family in Wyoming who had settled with a Philadelphia businessman 8 years ago on a debt they later discovered was fraudulent, and that he had written the name of that family down if Caleb thought it might be useful to Fitch. Caleb took the paper. He thanked the man. He rode to Fitch that afternoon. Fitch looked at the name on the paper and looked at Caleb over his glasses. "This is a witness," he said. "I know what it is. If that family is willing to testify about the Wyoming settlement." Doc Ellison thinks they might be. He says they're still angry about it. Fitch set the paper down with something that in a younger man might have been excitement. In Fitch, it manifested as a deliberate straightening of the existing papers on his desk, which Caleb had come to understand was his version of the same thing. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "Mr. Crow may have made a significant miscalculation in choosing this particular county for this particular maneuver. Because of the Wyoming family, because communities in this territory remember, and because they talk." He looked at Caleb. Has Mrs. Whitmore sent the second letter to Harris in Philadelphia?" 2 days ago." "Good." He folded his hands. "The circuit judge comes through in 6 weeks. I want to be ready before Crow can file any additional motions." 6 weeks was a long time with Crow applying pressure. They both knew it. The pressure arrived in the form of a story. Caleb did not know who told it first, or whether Potts had planted it directly or simply watered ground that was already prepared. But within 2 weeks of the wedding, the version of events circulating through the southern end of the valley was this: that Clara had come west specifically knowing about Caleb's isolated ranch and his lack of social connections, that she had arranged the agency placement deliberately, that the marriage had been a calculated transaction to evade a legitimate debt, and that Caleb was either complicit or foolish, depending on the teller's generosity. What the story did not account for was Emma. Emma had been doing her marketing work with Clara every Thursday morning, and she had been doing it quietly and without complaint, and with the particular steady competence that made people notice her whether they intended to or not. And sometime during the 3rd week, when a woman at the general store said something within Emma's earshot about Clara arriving with a plan and Caleb being taken for a fool, Emma had put down the parcel she was carrying and turned around. Clara told him about it that evening. She didn't raise her voice, Clara said. She was at the counter with her back to him, but he could hear the thing under the words. She just looked at the woman and said, "My sister did not have a plan. My sister had 2 little girls and 1 door left open, and she walked through it. The only plan she had was keeping us alive. And it worked." And then she picked up the parcel and walked out. Caleb sat at the table. "The woman didn't say anything back," Clara said. "Nobody in the store said anything." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long was she carrying that?" Clara turned around. Her eyes were bright in a way she was controlling carefully. "Since the 1st week," she said. "She's known what they were saying. She didn't tell me because she didn't want me to worry." "She's 10 years old," Caleb said. "She has been 10 years old in the way other children are 30, Clara said, "since the day our mother got sick." He thought about Emma holding that fence board on the first morning. About the way she had looked at him and said, "I learn fast." About her telling him she would make his life difficult if he hurt Clara, and meaning every word of it. I thought about the fact that she had been walking into that general store every week and listening to people say things about her sister and carrying it alone because she had decided it was her job to carry it. He pushed back from the table and stood up. "I'll go to the general store tomorrow." "Caleb, not to make a scene," he said. "Just to be there. Just so they see me there with all 3 of you doing the ordinary work of a Thursday morning, and understand that nothing they say changes what happens in this house." Clara looked at him for a moment. "Emma doesn't need rescuing," she said. "I know she doesn't," he said. "But she shouldn't have to do it alone." Clara was quiet. Then, "No," she said softly. "She shouldn't." The Thursday at the general store was unremarkable and entirely deliberate. Caleb walked in with Emma and Lily, bought everything on the list. At a normal pace spoke to 2 men he had done business with for years, nodded to Mrs. Calder, and walked out. He did not address the rumors. He did not perform anything. He simply existed in that space with his family unhurried and unafraid, and let the fact of them be its own statement. Lily, for her part, found a small carved wooden horse on the shelf near the door, and asked if she could have it with the focused, hopeful politeness of a child who has learned not to expect yes. Caleb looked at it, and looked at her, and bought it without discussion. Lily held it against her chest the entire way home and said not a single word, which was the loudest kind of thank you he had ever received. Emma walked beside him on the way out and said very quietly, so only he could hear, "You didn't have to come." "I know," he said. "We manage." "I know you do," he said. "I came because I wanted to." She looked up at him, that dark, careful gaze. Why? He thought about it. "Because managing alone is something you do when there's no other choice," he said. "You've been doing it long enough. Time to try the other thing." Emma was quiet for the rest of the walk to the wagon. But when they reached it, she put her hand briefly on his arm, just for a second, just long enough for him to feel it. And then she climbed up into the wagon without looking at him, and he understood that for Emma, that was the equivalent of a speech. Crow's next move came on a Tuesday. A second representative arrived. Not Potts this time, a different man, younger, with a harder edge and less practiced warmth. He came to the ranch in the middle of the afternoon and asked for Clara specifically. Caleb came out of the barn and stood in the yard and said Clara was occupied, and the man said he had a message that needed to be delivered directly, and Caleb said, "Deliver it to me or don't deliver it." The man looked at him, calculating. Then he said, "Mr. Crow has information indicating that the documentation Mrs. Whitmore intends to present to the circuit court may be disputed. There are questions about the chain of custody of certain papers. Questions about whether original documents were altered prior to being produced." Caleb felt something cold move through him. Say that plainly. Mr. Crow will argue in court that the papers were tampered with after Thomas Bennett's death, that the figures were changed. He met Caleb's eyes. He has an expert who will say so. Inside the cabin, Caleb heard Clara's footsteps stop. She had heard. He kept his face neutral. "Mr. Crow is welcome to make whatever argument he has the stomach for in front of a judge," he said. "That's what courts are for." "It's a serious allegation," the man said. "A forgery charge against Mrs. Whitmore would complicate her guardianship significantly." "Get off my land," Caleb said. This one left faster than Potts had. Caleb stood in the yard for a moment after the hoofbeats faded. Then he heard the cabin door, and Clara was beside him. "He's going to say I forged them," she said. "Yes." "Caleb, if he can make that argument stick even temporarily." "He can't," he said. "But he can make it." She was very still. "My father's handwriting is on those papers, his signature. If Crow brings someone who says it's not genuine, then we find someone who says it is." He turned to her. "Did your father have a regular notary, a bank officer? Someone who knew his signature well enough to swear to it," she thought. "His bank manager, a man named Arthur Greer. He handled all of my father's accounts for 15 years. "Write to him today," he said. "After Harris, both of them. It could take weeks for a response." "Then we start today." She looked at him. He could see her working through it. The timelines, the probabilities, the ways each thread could pull loose. He could see the moment she stopped calculating and made the decision to trust the calculation to someone else. "All right," she said. "Today." He nodded. Then she said quietly, "He's trying to scare us." "I know." "Is it working?" He looked at her directly. "On you." She held his gaze. "A little," she admitted. "Good," he said. She blinked. "Fear means you're paying attention. You stop being scared when you stop paying attention, and I need you paying attention." He paused. "But scared and stopped are two different things." She looked at him for a moment. Then something shifted in her expression. Not the near smile he had seen before, but something fuller, more open. The kind of expression people have when they've said something true without meaning to. "I'm not stopped," she said. "I know you're not," he said. The letter from Harris arrived on a Friday morning 17 days after Clara had sent the second request. Caleb was at the fence line when Emma came running, actually running, which he had never seen her do, and she was waving something white in her hand and calling his name in a voice that had lost all of its characteristic composure. He met her halfway across the field. She held out the letter. She was breathing hard. Her eyes were bright with something that was not quite tears, but lived next to them. He took the letter. He read it standing there in the field. Harris was alive. Crow had contacted him twice in person the second time with two men who Harris described carefully and without direct accusation in language that made it clear he had been threatened. But Harris had not handed over the ledger. Harris had instead, on the day after Crow's second visit, transferred the ledger into the care of a Philadelphia attorney with instructions to produce it only to Clara Bennett or her authorized representative. The attorney's name was at the bottom of the letter. Caleb read the name twice. Then he folded the letter carefully and looked at Emma. "Your father had a good man working for him," he said. Emma's voice when it came was unsteady for the first time since he had known her. "Harris taught me to play chess," she said. "When I was little, and Mama brought me to the office." She pressed her lips together. I didn't know if he held it," Caleb said. "He held it." Emma covered her mouth with one hand for just a moment. Then she lowered it and straightened and said, "We need to tell Clara." "We do," he said. They walked back to the cabin together. Caleb matched his pace to hers, which meant walking slower than he normally would, and he did not call ahead or hurry it. He let her carry it with him at her own pace, because she had earned the right to carry it. Clara was at the table when they came in. She took one look at Emma's face and stood up. Caleb gave her the letter. He watched her read it. He watched her reach the part about Crow's visits to Harris. He watched her jaw tighten. He watched her keep reading. He watched her reach the part about the Philadelphia attorney and the ledger, and he watched the thing in her face when she understood what Harris had done, the risk he had taken alone for a family he worked for a dead man's daughter he had not heard from in over a year. When she looked up, she was not pretending her eyes were dry. "He kept it safe," she said. "He did. We have to get it here. Fitch will know how to arrange it." He looked at her. "Clara, with the ledger and the pattern of 3 other families, Crow doesn't have a case. He has a strategy, and strategies fall apart when they're exposed." She stood there holding the letter, and he could see her doing something she had not let herself do in a very long time. Not planning, not calculating, not managing the next problem before the current one resolved, just feeling the weight go down, just for a moment. Lily came in from the back room dragging Thunder's brush, which she had taken inside to clean, and stopped when she saw Clara's face. "Did something bad happen?" she asked. Clara looked at her. She shook her head. "Something good," she said. "Something very good." Lily considered this. Then she held up the brush. "I cleaned it," she said. "For Thunder." "That was very thoughtful," Clara said. Lily nodded with the satisfaction of someone who has contributed meaningfully to a situation and knows it. She turned around and went back outside. Emma looked at Caleb. He looked at her. She said, 6 weeks until the judge. 6 weeks, he agreed. "That's enough time." "That's enough time," he said. She gave him that small, deliberate nod, the same one she had given him the night Crow's first man had come to the ranch. The same acknowledgement between 2 people who have agreed to hold a line together. He nodded back. Then he went to get his horse to ride to Fitch, because the ledger in Philadelphia was 6 weeks away from a circuit judge in Montana, and every day between here and that courtroom was ground that needed covering. And Caleb Whitmore had spent his whole life understanding that the ground did not cover itself. He rode out of the yard at a pace that meant business, and behind him in the cabin. Clara sat back down at the table and picked up a pen and began writing a letter to a Philadelphia attorney she had never met, to recover a ledger her father had left behind like a last gift he hadn't known how to deliver. Fitch read Harris's letter twice without speaking. Then he set it down, took his glasses off the cord, cleaned them with the edge of his shirt. A thing Caleb had come to recognize as his version of buying himself a moment to think and put them back on. "The ledger changes everything," he said. "I know it does. If it documents 3 prior transactions with the same pattern-inflated claims against deceased estates' families pressured into settling above the verified amount, then Crow is not defending a debt. He is defending a practice." Fitch looked at him steadily. "That is a significantly different proceeding. How do we get it here before the circuit date? I'll wire the Philadelphia attorney today. A document transfer of this importance will require proper chain of custody, signed affidavits from Harris attesting to where the ledger has been and who has had access since Bennett's death. If Crow tries to challenge its authenticity, we want that chain airtight." He paused. "It will cost more." "Do it," Caleb said. Fitch wrote the wire himself while Caleb waited. He wrote it in the precise, unhurried hand of a man who understood that words in legal documents were load-bearing, and that a single imprecise phrase could become the crack a good opposing attorney drove a wedge into. When he finished, he folded it and called his clerk to take it to the telegraph office. Then he looked at Caleb. "There's something else you should know." Caleb waited. "I made further inquiries about the Wyoming family Doc Ellison mentioned, the Hargrove family out of Cheyenne. The father died in 1873. Crow approached the widow with a debt claim 14 months later. She settled for $400 above the documented amount. He folded his hands on the desk. She is still in Cheyenne. She is still angry. And when I wrote to her explaining the situation, she wrote back within the week. He slid a letter across the desk. Caleb picked it up and read it. It was one page written in a hand that pressed hard on the downstrokes, the handwriting of someone who means every word. The woman's name was Dorothea Hargrove. She said she had been waiting 7 years for someone to give her a reason to say in public what she had been saying in private, and that if the circuit court in Harlan County, Montana, needed her testimony regarding Nathaniel Crowe, she would make the journey. Caleb set the letter down. "She'll come," he said. "She says so." Then we have the original documentation, we have the ledger, we have Harris to authenticate, and we have a prior victim willing to testify. He looked at Fitch. What does Crowe have? An expert, he claims, can challenge the authenticity of the original papers. A legal filing asserting the marriage was a maneuver to obstruct the debt claim. And, Fitch paused, a judge in a neighboring county who has ruled in his favor before. He filed a motion last week to have the hearing moved to that county on jurisdictional grounds. The cold thing in Caleb's chest again. Can he do that? He can file the motion. Whether it succeeds depends on our circuit judge, who is not that judge, and who I have some reason to believe does not hold that judge in particularly high regard. Fitch allowed himself a thin, precise smile. I have written a response to the motion that I am moderately proud of. Caleb stood. How long until we know? A week, perhaps 10 days. He rode, home through air that had started to carry the first edge of coming autumn, the particular clarity that hit the Montana high country in late August, when the summer heat broke and you could suddenly see further than you had in months. He thought about Dorothea Hargrove pressing hard on her downstrokes. He thought about Harris alone in a Philadelphia office with 2 of Crowe's men telling him what they needed and Harris saying no. I thought about all the people who had decided for their own reasons that Nathaniel Crowe should not win this one. He told Clara everything at dinner. Emma listened without eating, which Clara noticed and did not comment on. Lily ate normally and followed the conversation with the attentiveness of a child who understands that something important is happening, even if the specifics are beyond her, and who has learned that paying attention is how you stay prepared. When Caleb finished, Clara said, Dorothea Hargrove. Yes. She'll come all the way from Cheyenne. She says so. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, she lost $400, money she needed. Yes. She's not coming for the money. There's no money in it for her now. No, Caleb agreed. There isn't, there. Clara looked at the table. He could see her thinking about a woman in Cheyenne, 7 years of anger, a letter written in hard-pressing strokes. He could see her thinking about what it meant that someone she had never met was willing to make a long journey on her behalf. Not for compensation, but because the thing that had been done to her was wrong, and wrong things should be answered for. We have to win, Clara said. Not anxiously, just as a fact she was putting on the table between them. We're going to win, Caleb said. Emma looked up from her untouched food. How do you know? He looked at her. Because we have what's true. And because Crowe has spent 7 years assuming the people he goes after don't have what's true. But he has lawyers, Emma said. And money. He does, Caleb agreed. And we have Fitch and the ledger and Dorothea Hargrove and the original papers that your father was careful enough to keep, and Harris who was loyal enough to protect them. He paused. And we have 6 weeks. Emma looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her fork and ate. Lily said, Can I write a letter to the lady from Cheyenne? Clara looked at her. What would you say? Lily thought about it with great seriousness. Thank you for coming, she said. And that we have a horse named Thunder, who is very kind, and she can meet him if she wants. Caleb looked at Lily. Lily looked back at him with complete sincerity. I think, he said carefully, that might be the finest letter Dorothea Hargrove ever received. The jurisdictional motion was denied. Fitch's letter arrived on a Wednesday and contained 3 sentences. The motion had been reviewed and rejected by the presiding circuit judge, who found no grounds for transfer. The hearing would proceed in Harlan County as scheduled. Fitch wrote that the judge's written denial included language that suggested he was familiar with the general shape of the case and found certain aspects of the motion's framing worth noting on the record, which in Fitch's precise phrasing, Caleb understood to mean the judge had seen this kind of maneuver before and was not impressed by it, he told Clara in the kitchen. She closed her eyes for just a moment. Just one moment. Then she opened them and said, "What's next?" "We wait for the ledger, and for Mrs. Hargrove, and for Crow's next move." Yes. He did not have to wait long. 3 days after the motion was denied, Pete Harlan came out to the ranch again. He did not stay long. He sat at the table with his coffee and his cane and said, "The man Potts is back in town." Caleb set his cup down. "When?" "Day before yesterday. He's not asking questions this time. He's talking to anyone who'll listen." Pete looked at him steadily. "He's saying Caleb Whitmore interfered with a legitimate legal proceeding by marrying a woman for the purpose of obstructing it. He's saying the girls, Emma and Lily, are being kept on the ranch against the wishes of other family members who have a prior claim." Clara made a sound. Not a word. Just a sound. "What family members?" Caleb said, flat and quiet. "He doesn't name them. That's the point. It's a suggestion, not a claim. Something to make people wonder." Pete set his cup down. "There's more." "Say it." He approached Bill Delaney. "Bill's been running the livery the past 2 years. You know he talks to everyone who comes through. Potts offered him money to say he'd seen something irregular at your ranch. Something about the way the girls were being treated." Pete met Caleb's eyes. "Bill told him no. Came to me directly. But Potts found someone. I don't know who yet. Someone is going to say something in the next week or two, and it's going to be a lie, and it's going to be designed to give Crow grounds to petition for the girls to be removed to county custody pending the hearing." The kitchen was completely silent. Then Emma said from the doorway where she had been standing for the last 2 minutes, "He's going to take us." Clara was on her feet before Caleb could speak. "No," she said. "Emma, no. He's going to try." Emma's voice was controlled, but her face was not entirely. "He tried before, in Philadelphia. He talked to people and said things, and then a county officer came to our boarding house and—" She stopped. "He knows how to do this." Caleb looked at her. "How did you stop him in Philadelphia?" She met his eyes. "We ran." "We're not running," he said. Emma looked at him. He could see her working it through, measuring the distance between what she had learned to expect and what he was offering. That gap was not small. It had been built over 14 months of learning that promises were intentions, and intentions were not guarantees. "Caleb," she said carefully, "I am not saying I think you want to run. I am saying that when Crow moves on children, he moves fast. He doesn't give people time to respond." "I know," he said. "So we move faster." He looked at Pete. "Who's the county official who handles welfare petitions?" "Judge Alderman, but he's in—" "Get me in front of him tomorrow," Caleb said. "Today if possible. I want Fitch with me. I want documentation of our household affidavits from Cole and Doc Ellison. Anything that establishes the stability of this home before Crow can file anything." Pete nodded once and stood up. Clara said, "Emma." Emma looked at her. "Come here." Emma crossed the kitchen, and Clara took her face in both hands, the way she must have done when Emma was very small, and she looked at her directly and said, "I will not let him take you. Do you understand me? Not again. Not ever again." Emma's composure held for exactly 3 more seconds. Then it didn't. She pressed her face against Clara's shoulder, and Clara held her, and Caleb stood up from the table and walked to the window and looked at the yard and gave them the privacy of his turned back. From the other room, Lily appeared, drawn by a sound she didn't fully understand. She looked at Clara and Emma. She looked at Caleb's back. She came and stood beside him and slipped her hand into his without saying anything, and he closed his fingers around hers, and they both stood there, looking out at the yard together until Emma was done. Fitch moved with a speed that surprised Caleb. By the following afternoon, he had affidavits from Reverend Cole, Doc Ellison, Pete Harlan, and Margaret Cole, attesting to the character and stability of the Whitmore household and the clear and consistent care demonstrated toward both minor children. He had filed a preemptive counterbrief with the county court establishing Clara's guardianship and requesting that any future petition regarding Emma and Lily be directed to the circuit court rather than the county level, which effectively removed Crow's easiest avenue of attack. He had also, through channels he did not fully explain, obtained the name of the person Potts had approached to make a false statement. It was a man named Cutter who ran a small operation east of town and who owed more money to more people than he could comfortably repay. Potts had offered him $40. Fitch visited Cutter himself. He did not tell Caleb what was said in that meeting. He told Caleb only that Cutter had decided not to make any statement regarding the Whitmore ranch, and that he had communicated this decision to Potts, and that Potts had left town the following morning. Clara heard this and said quietly, "What did Fitch say to him?" "Don't know," Caleb said. "Caleb." "I genuinely don't know," he said. "I didn't ask. Some things run cleaner if you don't pull on every thread." She looked at him. "That is a very Western philosophy." "I am a very Western man." She almost smiled. It lasted less than a second, but he caught it. Dorothea Hargrove arrived on a Thursday 11 days before the circuit hearing. She was 61 years old, which Caleb had not known, and she walked with a cane of her own, which he also had not known, and she had the bearing of a woman who had been formidable once and had simply continued being formidable through the intervening years as a matter of principle. She arrived on the afternoon stage, took a room at the boarding house, and sent a message to Fitch's office that she was ready to meet at his earliest convenience. Caleb met her the following morning at Fitch's office. She shook his hand with a grip that meant business, and looked at him with sharp gray eyes that were assessing him in the same way his old foreman Pete assessed horses not unkindly, but thoroughly. "You're the rancher," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You married the Bennett girl to shore up her legal standing." "I married her because I wanted to," he said. The legal standing was a consequence, not a reason. She looked at him for a long moment. "My husband would have said exactly that," she said. "He was also a terrible liar, which is why I believed him." He was not sure whether that was a compliment, but he took it as one. She told her story to Fitch and Caleb together in the same direct, hard-pressing style as her letter. Her husband had borrowed money from Crow in 1871, a business loan documented legitimate with agreed terms. Her husband died of a fever in 1873. Crow appeared 14 months later with a claim that was $420 above the original documented amount, with interest calculations that Dorothea had contested, and that Crow's lawyer had explained with a confidence she had found unconvincing, but had not been equipped to disprove. She had paid. She had spent the following 7 years being angry about it in private and talking to her pastor about forgiveness, and had made moderate progress on the forgiveness. "When your letter arrived," she said to Fitch, "I put the forgiveness on hold." Fitch allowed himself that precise, thin smile. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, "I want you to understand what you're walking into. Crow's attorney will attempt to characterize your testimony as motivated by personal grievance." "It is motivated by personal grievance," she said. "It is also accurate. Both things can be true." Fitch looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "They can." Caleb walked her back to the boarding house after the meeting because she had said she liked to walk when she was thinking, and he understood the impulse. They went in companionable quiet for a while. Then she said, "Tell me about the girls." He told her about Emma and the fence board on the first morning, about Lily and Thunder. He told her about the cloth doll with documents sewn inside it, which made her exhale sharply through her nose in a way that was not quite a laugh, but held something dry and admiring. He told her about Emma in the general store putting down the parcel and saying my sister did not have a plan. Dorothea Hargrove was quiet for a moment. "My granddaughter is 8, she said. "She looks at the world the way you're describing that child looking at it. Like everything is a problem to be solved if you're just patient and paying attention." She paused. "I don't want her growing up in a world where Nathaniel Crow still operates." They reached the boarding house. "Thank you for coming," Caleb said. She looked at him. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Thank me after." The ledger arrived 6 days before the hearing. It came wrapped in oilcloth and inside a locked box, whose key arrived separately in a different envelope by a different stage, which was the Philadelphia attorney's precaution, and which Fitch called with visible appreciation, admirably cautious. Harris had included a signed and witnessed affidavit describing the ledger's location since Thomas Bennett's death, every person who had been in proximity to it, and the specific dates and nature of Crow's attempts to access it. Fitch opened the ledger at his desk with Caleb and Clara both present. Clara looked at her father's handwriting. The careful, meticulous columns, the dates and figures and marginal notes, and pressed 2 fingers briefly against her mouth. Then she straightened. "Show me the transactions," she said. Fitch showed her. 3 columns, 3 families, 3 sets of inflated claims. Dates spanning 9 years. The pattern was not subtle. The pattern was in fact so consistent that it looked less like opportunism and more like methodology. Clara looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "He did this to my father too. Not just the debt. He was already inflating the figures while my father was alive. That's why my father was trying to exit the partnership. He found out." She pointed to a marginal note in her father's handwriting, 3 words in a hand that was tighter and more urgent than the surrounding entries. She read them aloud. "Figures do not reconcile." Fitch leaned forward. "Your father knew," he said. "He knew, and he was documenting it, and then he got sick." She looked up. "If my father had lived another year, he would have had grounds for his own legal action against Crow," Fitch said. He was looking at the ledger with the expression of a man who has spent his career hoping for exactly this kind of document and has learned not to expect it. "Mrs. Whitmore, this ledger combined with Mrs. Hargrove's testimony and the original debt documentation does not merely defend against Crow's claim. It establishes a pattern of fraud across multiple states and territories." He looked at her. "The circuit judge will have no choice but to dismiss the claim, and depending on how the proceeding goes, he may refer the matter for further investigation." Clara sat very still. "It's over," she said. "Not until the hearing," Fitch said carefully. "Crow will have representation, and they will argue. But the weight of what we have—" He paused, which was the closest Fitch got to emphasis. "Yes, it is for all practical purposes over." Clara looked at Caleb. He looked back at her. There was a long moment in which neither of them said anything, because some things do not need saying, and some things cannot be said without diminishing them. Then she said very quietly, "My father kept good records." "He did," Caleb said. "He spent his whole life being meticulous about it, and I always teased him. I thought it was excessive." Her voice was steady, but only just. "He saved us from 2 years in the ground." Caleb reached across the desk and took her hand. She let him. The night before the hearing, none of them slept much. Caleb lay awake and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house. He heard Clara turn over twice in the room next to his. He heard Emma's voice low and brief, and Lily's answering murmur, and then quiet. He heard the particular pre-dawn stillness of a Montana ranch, when every sound carries further than it does in daylight. Around 4 in the morning, he got up and went to the kitchen and put coffee on, and he was standing at the window waiting for it when he heard a door, and then Clara appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the coffee. She looked at him. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "No." She came and stood beside him at the window. They stood there together looking out at the dark yard for a while, not speaking, the coffee heating behind them. Then she said, "What if something goes wrong tomorrow that we haven't anticipated? Then we deal with it. Fitch has been through every possible argument. I know. But Crow's attorney is good, better than we expected. Fitch said so himself." "Clara," she stopped. "Tomorrow we walk into that court with everything we have," he said. "We have more than enough. And when it's done, whatever the shape of it, we come home." He paused. "All 4 of us." She was quiet for a moment. "You never used to say that," she said. "Say what?" "Home. Like it means something." He thought about that. "I didn't used to mean it," he said. She turned and looked at him. In the dark kitchen, in the pre-dawn quiet, She looked at him with the same directness she had used on the day she arrived at his gate when she had stepped forward before he could speak, and said what needed saying without flinching from it. That quality had not changed in the months between. It had, if anything, deepened. "I'm glad I lied to the agency," she said. He looked at her. "I know you are. I'm not apologizing for it. I know you're not. But I am glad it was you," she said. "Specifically, that it was this gate and this ranch and this—" She made a small gesture that encompassed the kitchen, the dark window, the coffee heating everything. "I'm glad it was you." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I wrote to the agency and asked them to cancel my arrangement 6 days before your wagon arrived." She stared at him. "What?" "I lost my nerve," he said. "I sent the letter. But the wagon was already on its way, and the letter caught up to the agency after the arrangements were made, and they sent you a response that apparently arrived after you had already left." He paused. "I found out later. Fitch dealt with the agency correspondence as part of the filing." Clara looked at him for a very long moment. "You were going to cancel," she said. "Yes." "And the letter didn't arrive in time?" "No." She was quiet. He could see her turning this over, the shape of it, the narrow margin of it, the single piece of poor postal timing that stood between the life she had now and a very different road. "6 days," she said. 6 days. She exhaled, something between a laugh and something else entirely. "Your letter was 6 days too late. Or 6 days too early, depending on how you see it." She looked at him. She shook her head once slowly, with the expression of someone confronting the architecture of luck, and finding it simultaneously terrifying and remarkable. "Don't tell Emma," she said. "God, no." He agreed. She laughed. Actually laughed, the real one, the one that came up fast and unguarded, the one that sounded like relief, releasing from somewhere deep. He had heard it before in the evenings when Lily did something unexpected, in the moments when the ranch was loud and full, and she forgot for a second to manage anything. He had decided weeks ago that it was his favorite sound. He poured the coffee. They sat at the table in the dark kitchen and drank it together, and the morning came up slow and gray over the mountain, and the day that would end one chapter of their lives and begin another moved toward them, steady and inevitable. When the sky was light enough, Clara stood up and went to wake the girls. He heard her voice in the back room, low and calm. He heard Emma's immediate alert response. The girl did not ease into waking, she arrived fully formed, and Lily's slower, groggy one. He heard Clara say something he couldn't make out. He heard Lily say, "Is today the judge day?" And Clara saying yes. And Lily saying, "Will Thunder be okay while we're gone?" And Clara saying, "Caleb left him hay." And Lily saying, "Okay then." Caleb stood up and rinsed the cups and put on his good jacket. They rode into Harlan Creek together. All 4 of them in the wagon, in the early morning quiet before the town was fully awake. Emma sat straight beside Caleb on the bench and looked ahead without speaking. Lily sat behind them with Clara and held the small carved wooden horse he had bought her at the general store pressed between both palms. When they reached the courthouse, Dorothea Hargrove was already on the steps, upright with her cane, dressed in her best, with the expression of a woman who has been waiting 7 years for this specific morning and intends to use every minute of it. She looked at Emma and held out her hand. Emma shook it. "I've heard about you," Dorothea said. "Good things, I hope," Emma said. "Honest things," Dorothea said, "which I find more useful." Emma looked at her with immediate and genuine respect. They went inside. Crow had sent his best attorney, a man named Whitfield from St. Louis, with an expensive suit and the absolute ease of someone who wins more often than he loses and knows it. He shook Fitch's hand with polished courtesy and gave Caleb the brief assessing look of a man who has learned to measure opponents quickly and file the measurement away. Caleb met the look and did not perform anything. He simply stood. Whitfield looked at Clara, then at Emma and Lily, who were seated in the gallery with Pete Harlan's wife. Then back at Caleb. Something in his expression changed. Not much. Not enough that anyone not watching carefully would have caught it. But Caleb was watching carefully. Whitfield had seen something he had not been told to expect. Maybe it was the ledger already filed with the court. Maybe it was Dorothea Hargrove's name on the witness list. Maybe it was the quality of Fitch's filing, which Caleb knew from experience was more thorough than it looked on paper. Maybe it was simply the look on Clara's face, not afraid, not pleading, not performing contrition, just present and prepared and ready to lay everything she had on this table. Whitfield opened his briefcase and began reviewing documents with a focus that had Caleb thought shifted from confidence into something more like concentration. The judge arrived. The room settled. Fitch leaned close and said very quietly, "Ready." Caleb looked at Clara. She looked at him. Behind them, Emma sat straight in the gallery, and Lily held her carved horse, and Dorothea Hargrove sat like a woman who has made a long journey and intends to make it count. "Ready," Caleb said. The judge called the hearing to order. And everything Thomas Bennett had spent his meticulous life writing down was finally going to be heard. The judge's name was Clarence Howell, and he had been riding the Montana circuit for 19 years, and in 19 years, he had developed the particular stillness of a man who has heard every version of every story and has learned to wait for the version that is true. He read through Fitch's filing for 7 minutes after the room settled. No one spoke. Whitfield arranged papers on his table with the controlled efficiency of a man recalibrating. Fitch sat with his hands folded and his face composed. Caleb sat beside Clara and felt her breathing next to him, steady and deliberate, the way she breathed when something was costing her effort and she was not going to let it show. Judge Howell looked up. "Mr. Fitch," he said, "your filing references a ledger maintained by the late Thomas Bennett. I have the document before me. I want to establish for the record how it came to this court." Fitch rose. He explained the chain clearly. Harris, the Philadelphia attorney, the signed affidavit, the locked transfer. He named every hand the ledger had passed through since Thomas Bennett's death. He did it in 3 minutes without referring to notes, which Caleb had come to understand was Fitch's way of signaling that he had lived inside a set of facts long enough that they had become part of him. Howell nodded. "Mr. Whitfield, do you contest the chain of custody?" Whitfield stood. He was smooth. Caleb gave him that. "Your Honor, we have questions regarding the integrity of the document itself. We have engaged an expert who is prepared to—" "Who is your expert?" Howell said. Whitfield named a man from Denver. Howell's expression did not change. "I know of him," he said. "He testified in a document authenticity case in Wyoming 3 years ago, the other side." He looked at Whitfield. "I found his methodology wanting. You may present him, but I want you to understand the weight I am likely to assign his testimony." He paused. "Do you wish to proceed on that basis?" Whitfield was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Will withdraw the expert, Your Honor." In the gallery. Pete Harlan's wife made a small sound. Pete put his hand on her arm. Caleb did not move. He felt Clara's hand find his under the table and grip it once briefly and then release. Howell looked at the ledger. He looked at the original debt documentation. He looked at Whitfield. "Your client's claim against the Bennett estate is based on a figure of—" He named the amount, which exceeds the documented original agreement by— He named the difference, plus interest and penalties, for which I see no supporting documentation in your filing. He set the papers down. "Mr. Whitfield, what is your argument for the additional amount?" Whitfield argued it. He argued it well. Caleb thought he used words like implied terms and customary practice and good faith interpretation. And he spoke with the fluency of a man who had made this kind of argument before, and had occasionally made it stick. He went on for 11 minutes. Howell let him finish. Then he said, "Call your first witness, Mr. Fitch." Fitch called Harris first by written deposition, since Harris could not make the journey. The court clerk read it aloud. Harris's account of the original loan arrangement, his 15 years managing Thomas Bennett's accounts, his direct knowledge of the figures involved, his account of Crow's visits after Bennett's death. The deposition was 31 pages, and it took 40 minutes to read, and the room was very quiet throughout. When it was done, Whitfield had 3 questions for Cross. All 3 went nowhere useful. He sat down. Fitch called Dorothea Hargrove. She walked to the front of the room with her cane, and the careful, upright posture of a woman who had decided exactly how she was going to carry herself in this room, and had been carrying herself that way since she got dressed that morning. She sat in the chair the clerk indicated. She looked at Howell, then at Fitch, then briefly at Whitfield, with the expression of someone who has already formed an opinion and is confirming it. Fitch took her through it methodically. The original loan. The terms. Her husband's death. Crow's appearance, 14 months later. The inflated claim. The settlement. "Why did you settle?" Fitch asked. "Because I was alone, and I had 2 children, and I did not understand enough about the law to know that what he was doing was wrong," she said. "I thought I must be mistaken. I thought perhaps I had misremembered the terms. I thought—" She paused. Not from distress. From precision. She wanted to say it exactly right. "I thought that a man with lawyers and documentation must know something I didn't. And now? Now I know he knew exactly what I didn't know," she said. "He relied on it." Fitch let that sit for a moment. Then he asked her to look at the ledger entry corresponding to her husband's transaction. She looked at it. She confirmed the name, the date, the figures. Fitch sat down. Whitfield approached her with the particular courtesy men use when they are about to be discourteous. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, "you settled this claim 7 years ago, voluntarily." "Under duress," she said. "You signed an agreement." "I did. And yet here you are testifying against my client in a proceeding that has nothing legally to do with you." He paused. "Is it possible, Mrs. Hargrove, that what we're seeing here is personal grievance being used to dress up an otherwise unsupported legal challenge?" Dorothea Hargrove looked at him. She said, "Young man, I am 61 years old, and I came from Cheyenne on a stage that took 3 days, because a family I have never met is being subjected to the same fraud that was committed against mine. Personal grievance is exactly what this is. It is also accurate. I explained to Mr. Fitch that both things can be true simultaneously, and he agreed with me. You are welcome to ask the judge whether he concurs." The room was very still. Howell looked at Whitfield over his glasses. "Move on, counselor." Whitfield moved on. He did not find what he was looking for. Dorothea Hargrove walked back to the gallery with her cane. She passed Emma's seat. Emma looked up at her. Dorothea gave her a single brief nod, one soldier to another, and sat down. Emma turned back to face the front. Fitch presented the ledger evidence for 40 minutes. He walked through each of the 3 prior transactions systematically. The pattern of timing. 14 to 18 months after the original debtor's death. The consistent inflation ratio. The absence of documentation for the additional amounts claimed. He presented the original Bennett debt agreement alongside Crow's claim and laid the 2 figures on the record side by side and let the difference speak for itself. Whitfield objected 4 times. Howell sustained 1 objection and overruled 3. When Fitch sat down, Whitfield made his full argument. It took 25 minutes, and it was Caleb acknowledged privately better than he had expected. Whitfield was too skilled to defend the indefensible, so he did not try. Instead, he argued that the additional charges, while poorly documented, were consistent with private lending practices of the period and could not be definitively proven fraudulent on the basis of one ledger maintained by one party. He argued that Dorothea Hargrove's testimony was irrelevant to the specific claim before the court. He argued that the marriage between Caleb and Clara Whitmore had been arranged in direct response to the legal proceedings and should be viewed in that context. Howell let him finish. Then the judge looked at the documents in front of him for a long moment. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, "I want to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. In your professional opinion, not as counsel for Mr. Crow, but as an officer of this court, can you point me to a single piece of documentation that supports the additional amounts your client is claiming?" Whitfield was quiet. "Take your time," Howell said. The silence lasted 8 seconds. Caleb counted them. "No, Your Honor," Whitfield said. "I cannot." Howell nodded. He wrote something. He looked up at the room. "The claim of Nathaniel Crow against the estate of Thomas Bennett is dismissed in its entirety," he said. "The documented original debt as established by the agreement bearing both parties' signatures was satisfied in full by the deceased prior to his death as indicated in the Bennett ledger Under entry, dated March 14, 1877. There is no remaining obligation. He set his pen down. I am further directing a copy of today's proceedings, including the ledger and Harris deposition to the Territorial Attorney's Office, with a recommendation that Mr. Crow's business practices across multiple jurisdictions be reviewed. He looked at Whitfield. You'll want to advise your client of that development. Whitfield gathered his papers. He did not look at Caleb. He did not look at Clara. He walked out of the courtroom with the dignified efficiency of a man who is paid to argue and is not paid to feel things about the outcome, and the door closed behind him, and the room released a collective breath that had been held for the better part of 3 hours. Clara did not cry. Caleb had half expected it, the relief breaking through after months of carrying it, but she sat beside him with her hands flat on the table, and breathed in and breathed out, and looked at the place where Judge Howell had been sitting, and what was on her face was not relief exactly. It was something quieter and more fundamental. Like a load-bearing wall that has been under pressure for so long that when the pressure finally lifts, the thing it was holding doesn't collapse, it simply stands finally on its own. Fitch leaned over. It's done, he said. I know, she said. You should also know. He paused. The entry I referenced, March 14, 1877. Your father made his final payment 4 months before he died. The debt was gone. Crow had no legitimate claim from the moment he walked through your door. Clara closed her eyes. She kept them closed for 3 seconds. Then she opened them and said, He knew. My father knew he'd paid it. That's why he was keeping those records. He knew Crow was going to come back with something. Yes, Fitch said gently. I believe so. She looked at the table for a moment. Something moved through her face that Caleb recognized as grief and gratitude, arriving at the same time from different directions, which is one of the harder things a person can be asked to feel. He did not say anything. He did not try to manage it. He let it be what it was. Then Emma was beside the table, and she looked at Clara's face and understood immediately the way Emma understood most things, and she put her hand on Clara's shoulder. Clara reached up and covered it. From behind them, Lily's voice. Did we win? Pete Harlan's wife said, Yes, sweetheart, you won. Lily said, Good. I told Thunder we were going to win. I didn't want to be wrong. Caleb stood up and turned around, and Lily was there with her wooden horse and her matter-of-fact expression, and her absolute confidence in outcomes. She had no real way to predict, and he picked her up because she was 6 years old, and he felt like it. And she allowed this with the dignity of someone accepting a reasonable tribute. And over her shoulder, he saw Dorothea Hargrove standing at the back of the room with her cane and her upright posture watching all of them. He caught her eye. She lifted her chin once, short, definitive. Then she turned and walked out into the morning. The ride home was different from the ride in. Nobody said much, but the quality of the quiet was different. Not the tight, careful silence of people holding themselves together, but the loose, breathable silence of people who have stopped needing to hold anything. Emma sat on the bench beside Caleb and watched the road, and after a while she said, What happens now? What do you mean? Caleb said. With Crow, the attorney's office. That's not our fight anymore, he said. That's between Crow and the territory. Emma thought about this. But he might do it again. To someone else. He might, Caleb said. But now there's a record. Howell put it in writing. The next time Crow goes after a widow or a family in debt, there's a file somewhere with his name on it. Emma was quiet for a moment. That's not enough. No, Caleb agreed. It's not, but it's more than there was yesterday. She accepted this with the pragmatic seriousness of someone who has learned that the gap between justice and satisfaction is real and must be lived with. Okay, she said. They drove on. After a while, Lily fell asleep against Clara with her wooden horse in her hand, and Clara put an arm around her and looked out at the wide Montana sky, and Caleb drove the wagon without hurrying because there was no hurry left in this day. Clara said quietly enough not to wake Lily. My father paid it off. He did. 4 months before he died, he must have scraped together everything he had left. She paused. He never told me. I think he didn't want me to worry about whether the money would hold. He was protecting you, Caleb said. He was always protecting everyone. Her voice was steady but soft. He would have hated knowing what Crow tried to do with it. He also would have known his daughter was the reason it didn't work, Caleb said. You kept those papers. You kept that ledger. You made Harris understand what he needed to protect. Everything that happened today started with your father's records and what you did with them. She was quiet for a moment. We did, she said. What we did with them. He looked at the road. Yes, he said. We did. When they got back to the ranch, Pete Harlan was already there, having come ahead to check on things, and he had made coffee and started a fire, because Pete Harlan expressed care through practical action, and always had. His wife took Lily inside and settled her on the bed, and Emma went to find Thunder, who had been in the pasture all day and required a report on the day's events. Caleb stood in the yard for a moment after the wagon was unhooked and the horses were put up. The afternoon had gone to that particular gold that came in late August. Everything lit from a low angle, so that even ordinary things looked like they were significant. He stood in it and breathed. Clara came out and stood beside him. They stood there for a while without speaking. Then she said, I need to write to Harris. Tonight. Tomorrow is soon enough. She paused. I want to tell him what the judge said, about the March entry, about the payment. She paused again. He spent 15 years working for my father. He deserves to know that my father had finished what he started. He does, Caleb agreed. I also want to send him something. Money if we can manage it. He took a real risk. We can manage it, Caleb said. She looked at him. We're not flush. We're not broke. And the man hid a ledger from 2 of Crow's people. We can manage it. She looked at him for a moment. With that expression she had the one that arrived before the full smile, but carried more weight than the smile itself. Then she said, Caleb. Thank you. He looked at her. You don't need to. I know I don't need to, she said. I'm doing it anyway. Because 6 months ago I lied to an agency and climbed onto a wagon with 2 children and 1 suitcase, and no plan that had a real end. And now I'm standing in my yard on my ranch, and my daughter's guardian case is closed, and Nathaniel Crow has a file in the territorial attorney's office. She met his eyes. That is not a small thing. None of that happened without you. He was quiet for a moment. Your father's records happened without me, he said. Harris happened without me. Dorothea Hargrove happened without me. Emma in the general store happened without me. He paused. I opened a gate and stepped back. The rest was you. She shook her head slowly. That is either the most modest thing you've ever said or the least accurate. Probably both, he agreed. She laughed. The real one again, the fast, unguarded one, and it went out across the yard and into the late afternoon air. And from the pasture, Thunder's ears swiveled toward the sound, and from somewhere behind the fence, Emma's voice said something to the horse that Caleb could not hear, but that made Lily, who had apparently woken up and followed Emma outside, laugh with the full-body abandonment of a 6-year-old who does not yet know how to do anything by halves. In the weeks that followed, the 4 of them settled into a life that was different from anything any of them had lived before, and yet felt somehow like something they had been practicing for. Pete Harlan came out twice a week now, not because the ranch needed him, but because the ranch had become a place where it was good to be, and Pete was old enough to know that such places were not common and should be visited when available. His wife came with him on Sundays, and she and Clara cooked together and argued comfortably about methods which Caleb watched from a respectful distance, because the combination of those 2 women with opinions about cooking was not something a sensible man inserted himself into. Doc Ellison stopped by in early September to check on a cough Lily had developed, which turned out to be minor, and was gone within a week. He stayed for coffee and said with the measured delivery of a man who had learned to choose his words, Word came through from the territorial office. They've opened a formal inquiry into Crow's practices. Wyoming and Pennsylvania both have been contacted. Clara looked at her coffee. How long does something like that take? Longer than it should, Doc Ellison said. But it started. Emma, sitting at the table with the book, did not look up, but she stopped turning pages. "That's enough," she said quietly. Doc Ellison looked at her. "I believe it is," he said. She turned a page. Mrs. Calder came to the ranch one afternoon in the second week of September. Caleb saw her wagon coming down the track and said nothing and went to the barn, because whatever she had come to say was between her and Clara, and it was not his place to stand in it. He heard them on the porch for 20 minutes. He could not make out the words. When he came back out, the wagon was gone, and Clara was standing in the yard. "What did she want?" he asked. "She brought preserves," Clara said. "And she said—" She paused. "She said she was sorry for the things she had said to you early on, about sending us back." She looked at the jar in her hand. She said Emma reminded her of herself at that age, and she didn't realize it until the day Emma said what she said in the store. Caleb considered this. "That's something." "She also said her preserves are better than mine, which is debatable." He looked at the jar. "Is it debatable?" Clara looked at him with severity. "Yes," she said. "It is very debatable." He went back to the barn. Dorothea Hargrove's letter arrived on a Thursday in October. She wrote from Cheyenne in her hard-pressing hand, 3 pages, covering the journey home, the conversation she had with her granddaughter about the trip and the visit she had made to her husband's grave on the day she returned, which she described without apology and without excessive weight, the way a person describes something they have made peace with and choose to revisit on their own terms. In the last paragraph she wrote, "I told my granddaughter about your Emma. I told her that there is a girl in Montana who walked into a store where people were saying unkind things and put down what she was carrying and told them the truth, and then picked everything back up and walked out. My granddaughter asked if Emma was scared. I said I didn't know, but that it didn't matter because she did it anyway. My granddaughter thought about that for a while. Then she said she wanted to be like that. I told her she already was. I thought you should know." Clara read it aloud at the dinner table. When she finished, Emma was looking at her plate. "She told her granddaughter about me," she said. "She did," Clara said. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, "I was scared," she said. "In the store, when I said it." "I know," Clara said. "My hands were shaking." "Emma," Caleb said. She looked at him. "That's what courage is," he said. "Scared and doing it anyway. The not scared version is just not paying attention." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at her plate. "Okay," she said. Lily said, "I'm never scared." Everyone at the table looked at her. She looked back with absolute sincerity. "I'm not," she said. "I just figure things will work out." Clara made the sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry. "That," Caleb said, "is possibly more terrifying." Lily considered this. "Maybe," she said. And she went back to her dinner. The winter came down off the mountains in November, and it came hard the way Montana winters did, without apology and without delay. Emma learned to read fence conditions in a blizzard. She learned it the same way she learned everything, by watching once, asking one precise question, and then doing it correctly the second time. By December, she was doing the East Line check without Caleb, which freed him for the stock work, which was the kind of quiet rearrangement of labor that a working ranch required, and that Emma had instinctively understood from the beginning. Clara managed the interior of the ranch through the winter with the same organized competence she had brought to everything since the first week, and she added to it now a comfort that had not been present before, a willingness to rest in the evenings, to sit by the fire with her hands in her lap, instead of always finding the next task to let the house be warm and filled and enough. Lily grew 3/4 of an inch, which she measured against the doorframe, with a solemnity that suggested she considered physical growth a personal accomplishment rather than a biological event. Thunder made it through the winter with the durable stubbornness of an animal who has decided he is not finished yet, which Lily considered a personal victory and which Caleb did not dispute. On a cold evening in January, when the 4 of them were at the table after dinner and the fire was going and the wind was doing what Montana wind did. In January, Emma looked up from her book and said, I want to be a teacher. The table was quiet. There's no school closer than 12 miles, she said. The children in this valley don't have a teacher. There should be one. Clara looked at her. That's a real thing you could do. I know it's a real thing, Emma said with the mild impatience of someone who does not make statements about things that aren't real. I'm not saying it as a wish, I'm saying it as a plan. Caleb looked at her. She was 10 years old, and she was making a plan for her life with the same directness she had used to tell him what needed doing on her first morning on this ranch. He thought about the distance between that morning and this evening, and about everything that had been built in the span between, and he found the thought too large to carry in a single direction, so he let it rest. We'll figure out what training you need, he said, and how to get you there. Emma nodded. I know we will, she said. Not gratitude, just acknowledgement, the same as always. She went back to her book. Lily, who had been following the conversation with her chin in her hand, said, I'm going to take care of animals. All animals? Clara asked. Yes, Lily said, but especially horses, especially old ones that people don't think are useful anymore. Caleb looked at the fire. That, he said, is a fine thing to do. Lily nodded. I know, she said. Tang. Spring came, the way it always did in that country, sudden and overwhelming. The mountains giving back everything they had held all winter in a rush of cold water and new green. Caleb walked the fence line in March with Emma beside him, and thought about the first morning she had done this, the suitcase in her two hands, and the question about what needed doing, and the look on her face that said she would hold whatever needed holding for as long as it took. You've grown, he said. 1.5 inches, she said. Since September. That's not what I meant. She looked at him. She understood immediately because she always did. I know, she said. You've changed too. Have I? You talk more, she said. At dinner. You used to sit there and eat and say 3 things and go to bed. Now you say more. She considered. It's good. Lily needs people who respond to things she says. Otherwise, she just talks more. He looked at the fence line. She's going to be formidable, he said. She already is, Emma said. She just doesn't know it yet. She paused. That's probably also good. They walked on. After a while she said, Do you ever think about before we came? He thought about it honestly. Sometimes, he said. Less than I used to. What do you think about when you think about it? The quiet, he said. I used to think the quiet was what I needed. Turns out I just hadn't heard the other thing yet. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, what other thing? He gestured broadly in the direction of the cabin behind them, where Clara was doing something with the garden that she had explained to him twice, and that he had not fully followed, and where Lily was almost certainly talking to Thunder about the spring grass. That, he said. Emma looked in the direction he had gestured. She looked for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, like something she was testing the weight of before she set it down, Me too. He did not say anything. He just nodded. They walked back along the fence line together in the spring morning, checking what needed checking, fixing what needed fixing, the way you did when something was yours and you intended to keep it. Years later, when people in the valley talked about the Whitmore family, and they did talk about them because the story had the quality that good stories always have, which is that it tells people something true about what is possible. What they remembered was not the courtroom, and not Nathaniel Crowe, and not the ledger, or the circuit judge, or Dorothea Hargrove's long journey from Cheyenne. What they remembered was simpler. They remembered a man who opened a gate. They remembered 2 little girls climbing down from a wagon with one suitcase between them. They remembered a woman who stepped forward before anyone could speak. They remembered a cloth doll that turned out to be carrying something important. And they remembered what Caleb Whitmore said once, when someone asked him years later when Emma was teaching the valley's children in the schoolhouse that had been built by community hands in 1882, and Lily had a name in 3 counties for bringing difficult horses back to themselves, when someone asked him how it was that a man known for keeping to himself had ended up with a family that size. He had thought about it for a moment. Then he said, I didn't end up with them. They didn't end up with me. We chose each other. There's a difference." He paused. "The choosing is the whole thing," he said. "Everything else is just what comes after. And everything that came after was this: a woman who had arrived with nothing and built everything, who had learned to put her hands in her lap in the evenings and let the house be enough. A girl who grew into a teacher and who told her students on the first day of every school year that courage was not the absence of fear, but what you did with it anyway. A girl who grew into a woman known for her gentleness with animals and her certainty that old things still had their best use ahead of them. A man who had spent 4 years perfecting the art of wanting nothing, who had discovered on a hot summer afternoon when a wagon stopped at his gate that he had been waiting the whole time. Not for a solution, not for a rescue, for 3 people who would stay. And they had. And that was everything.